The beloved healer. The village of Bantua lay nestled between rolling green hills and the mighty Oro River, a source of life and legend. The people of Bantua lived simple but content lives, bound together by tradition and a deep respect for the land. At the heart of the village stood a modest clinic, built with sun-dried clay bricks and a thatched roof that shaded the sick from the scorching African sun. This was the home of Dr. Kofi Adibeo, the beloved healer of Bantua. Dr. Kofi was a man of strong stature, with deep brown skin, thoughtful dark eyes, and salt and pepper hair that hinted at his years of experience. He carried the aura of wisdom beyond his age and walked with the gentle confidence of a man who had saved more lives than he could count. His hands were legendary. They had delivered hundreds of babies, stitched wounds, and mended broken bones. To the people of Bantua, he was more than a doctor. He was a protector, a guardian of life itself. But despite the praise and admiration, Kofi had never been one for riches or glory. He charged little or nothing at all, knowing that health was a gift, not a business. Life is more important than money, he would often say, waving away the few coins the villagers tried to offer. And so, Bantua thrived under his care. But peace does not last forever. One evening, as the orange sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, something unexpected arrived at Kofi's doorstep. A cry for help. A mother in distress. Kofi was inside the clinic, preparing a batch of herbal tonics, when a desperate voice pierced the air. Dr. Kofi. Help. Please. The voice belonged to a man, frantic and breathless, carrying his heavily pregnant wife in his arms. The woman's face was twisted in pain, her dark braids damp with sweat, her lips trembling as she clutched her swollen belly. It was Abina, a young woman from the outskirts of the village. Her husband, Kwesi, had carried her all the way from their farm, his feet covered in dust from the long journey. The baby, Abina gasped, her eyes filled with fear. Something is wrong. Kofi did not hesitate. Bring her inside, he instructed, his voice calm and steady. Turned, prepare warm water and fresh linens. Turned, the clinic's most experienced midwife, was already moving, gathering supplies with the practiced ease of someone who had seen many births before. She had been by Kofi's side for years, assisting in deliveries and caring for newborns. If there was anyone Kofi trusted, it was her. As they laid Abina down, Kofi examined her carefully. Her labor was difficult, the baby was not in the right position. A bad delivery could mean disaster for both mother and child. But Kofi had never lost a mother. And he did not intend to start now. A birth like no other. Hours passed, the air thick with tension. Abina screamed as waves of pain tore through her. Kwesi held her hand, whispering soft words of encouragement, his own face pale with fear. Ton walked beside Kofi, wiping the sweat from his brow as he guided the baby into the world. And then, a final, piercing cry. A tiny, wailing voice filled the air. The baby was born. A boy, strong and healthy, his skin glistening under the lantern light. A wave of relief washed over everyone. Abina, exhausted but smiling, wept with joy as Kofi placed the baby in her arms. The clinic was filled with laughter, the cries of the newborn a melody of life itself. But as Kofi cleaned the afterbath, something unsettled him. The placenta, it was different. Dark veins ran through it, twisting unnaturally, pulsing in a way Kofi had never seen before. A strange shiver crawled up his spine. Ton saw it too. "Doctor, what is that?" she whispered. Kofi said nothing. He carefully wrapped the placenta in cloth and set it aside, his heart restless. Something was not right. But he didn't know what. A troubling dream. That night, Kofi could not sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying the strange birth over and over. Finally, exhausted, he drifted into uneasy sleep. And then, He dreamed. He stood at the edge of the Oro River, the moon casting silver light upon its surface. But the river was not calm. It churned, dark and angry, its depth swelling like a storm. And then he heard them. The cries. Newborn babies, wailing in the darkness. Their voices rose from the water, echoing through the trees. Kofi's heart pounded. He tried to move, to step away from the riverbank. But the ground shifted beneath him, and suddenly, he was sinking into the water. Tiny hands reached for him from below. And then, a voice. A whisper, cold and distant. "Doctor, return what was taken." Kofi gasped awake. His skin was damp with sweat, his breath ragged. He sat upright in his bed, staring into the darkness. His heart was racing. It was just a dream, wasn't it? But deep inside, Kofi knew. Something had changed. And the peace of Banchua would never be the same again. The rising shadows. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Banchua, but for Dr. Kofi Adibeo, it brought no comfort. He sat outside his clinic, staring at the road leading to his mother's home, his heart heavy with worry. His mother, Naneya, the woman who had raised him with wisdom and love, was gravely ill. Despite all his medical knowledge, despite the herbs, tonics, and treatments he had used on countless others, nothing was working. Her body was failing, her once strong voice reduced to a whisper. Kofi clenched his fist. He had never felt this helpless before. A son's desperation. The clinic was unusually quiet that afternoon. Mothers still came, their bellies swollen with life, their faces full of trust. But Kofi's mind was elsewhere. On the one person he couldn't save. As soon as his shift ended, he hurried to his mother's hut, where Ton was sitting beside her, gently dabbing her forehead with a damp cloth. "Doctor," Ton looked up, worry in her eyes. Kofi barely acknowledged her as he knelt beside Naneya, taking her frail hand in his own. "Mama," his voice was hoarse. "You need to fight." The old woman gave him a weak smile, her eyes tired but full of love. "My son," she murmured. "You have already done more for me than any child could. I have lived a full life. If it is my time, then so be it." Kofi shook his head, refusing to accept her words. "No. There is a hospital in the city. The best doctors are there. They can save you." Ton and Naneya exchanged a worried glance. The hospital in the city was not for people like them. The cost alone was more than he had ever earned in his life. But Kofi didn't care. He couldn't let her die. That night, as he lay awake in his mother's hut, he knew one thing for certain. He needed money. And fast. A shadow from the past. The next morning, after checking on his patients, Kofi sat outside the clinic, staring at the horizon. His mind was racing, searching for a solution. That was when he heard a familiar voice. Kofi Adibeo. "Still playing the hero, I see." Kofi's head snapped up. Standing before him was a man dressed in fine city clothes, his dark skin glowing with wealth, his smile full of hidden intentions. Malik. An old childhood friend. They had grown up together, once inseparable as brothers. But while Kofi had chosen medicine and service, Malik had left Banchua, chasing fortune and power in the city. And he had found it. Kofi stood, shaking his friend's hand. "Malik, it's been years." "Too long," Malik replied, his sharp eyes scanning the clinic. He smiled. "I hear you are still the same man. Helping people for free, refusing wealth. And now, your mother is dying." Kofi stiffened. "I didn't come here for your pity, Malik." Malik chuckled, his voice smooth like the merchants of the city. "Pity? No, my friend. I came with an opportunity. A dangerous offer. They sat on the wooden bench outside the clinic, the air thick with tension. Malik leaned in. I have connections, Kofi. Powerful people. People who are willing to pay for things most would overlook. Kofi frowned. What do you mean? Malik's smile widened. Placentas. Kofi's breath caught. What? Malik shrugged. Placentas, my friend. The afterbath. Many consider it useless. But in the city, it is valuable, used for medicines, charms, rituals. The right buyer will pay a small fortune for each one. Kofi's stomach turned. He thought of all the new mothers in Bantua, their faces glowing with love as they held their babies. The placenta was sacred, part of a child's journey into the world. Selling it. It was unthinkable. No. Kofi's voice was firm. I will not steal from my patients. Malik sighed, shaking his head. Think, Kofi. This is easy money. You don't even have to ask the mothers. Just take the placentas after birth. No one will know. Kofi clenched his fist. I said no. Malik leaned back, crossing his arms. Then, his voice softened. Would you let your mother die when the answer is right in front of you? Kofi flinched. Don't bring my mother into this. Malik's expression didn't change. She doesn't have much time, does she? You need money. I am offering you a solution. Just one, Kofi. One placenta. That's all it takes. Kofi closed his eyes. The weight of the choice crushed him. But what choice did he have? A step into darkness. That night, Kofi sat beside his mother, watching her chest rise and fall weakly. Her breathing was shallow, her body frail. Every second, she was slipping away. He thought of all the mothers he had helped. All the children he had saved. And then he thought of the one woman he could not save, his mother. His hands trembled. His heart ached. One time. Just once. That was all he needed. He would save his mother, and never do it again. With a heavy heart, he rose from his seat. He had made his decision. The first thing. The next morning, a woman arrived at the clinic in labor. Her name was ESI, and she was young, barely 18. Her labor was long and difficult, but in the end, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The room was filled with joy, but Kofi felt none of it. As Tond cleaned the baby and handed the crying infant to ESI, Kofi quietly set aside the placenta. It felt heavier in his hands than it should have. Tond turned to him. Should I wrap the placenta for the mother? Kofi forced a smile. No, Tond. I will handle it. His voice did not sound like his own. Tond hesitated, then nodded and returned to the mother. Kofi stepped into the storeroom, his hands shaking. He wrapped the placenta in cloth. And then, under the cover of darkness, he walked to the edge of the village. Malik was waiting. Without a word, Kofi handed him the bundle. Malik grinned and placed a heavy pouch of gold coins into Kofi's hands. A pleasure doing business with you, my friend. And then he disappeared into the night. Kofi stood there, staring at the money in his hands. His mother would leave. But at what cost? Deep inside, he knew. There was no turning back, the hidden trade. The village of Bantua had never thrived as it did now. Babies were being born safely, mothers healed quickly, and Dr. Kofi Adebayo was praised more than ever before. But beneath the surface of this prosperity, a shadow grew. And no one knew it better than Kofi himself. Every birth, every newborn cry, weighed on him like a curse. Because with each child that came into the world, he was stealing something sacred. And selling it to the highest bidder. But he told himself it was for a greater purpose. For his mother. for her life. And so, the trade continued. The village unaware of its curse. In the daylight, Bantua flourished. The clinic was busier than ever, and women from surrounding villages flocked to Dr. Kofi's care, believing his hands were blessed by the gods. With each birth, the money piled up. Malik's buyers were hungry for more, and Kofi gave them what they wanted, always telling himself it would be the last time. And when his mother, Naneya, was finally strong enough to travel, he arranged for her to be taken to the best hospital in the city. For the first time in months, Kofi allowed himself to breathe. His mother would live. But deep inside, he knew his soul had been sold in the process. Ton's growing suspicions. In the midst of the joy that filled Bantua, one person saw what others did not. Ton. The sharp-eyed midwife had walked beside Kofi for years, watching his gentle hands bring life into the world. She had trusted him, admired his selflessness. But now, something was wrong. It started as small things, subtle shifts that most wouldn't notice. Kofi, once open and cheerful, was distant and guarded. He never let anyone else handle the placentas anymore. He insisted on wrapping them himself, keeping them away from the mothers. And when she asked why, his answers were vague. It's to keep things sanitary. Mothers shouldn't have to worry about these things. Trust me, Ton. But Ton didn't trust him anymore. Something felt off, and she was determined to find out why. Whispers of the unseen. As Ton kept her watchful eyes on Kofi, strange rumors spread through the village. It began with a fisherman. One night, he stumbled into the village, pale and trembling, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw them, he murmured. So what? Someone asked. His eyes were wide with fear. Hands. Pale, ghostly hands, reaching from the river. Some laughed it off, dismissing him as a drunken fool. But then came the second story. A woman, a mother who had given birth weeks ago, rushed to the village square in hysterics. I saw my child, she sobbed. In my dreams, but she was in the river. Calling to me. Begging me to find her. Her wail sent chills through those who listened. Was it just a dream? Or something more? The whisper spread like wildfire, and the once joyful village began to feel haunted. Ton heard the rumors, and though she was a woman of science, she couldn't ignore the growing unease in her heart. The strange behavior. The missing placentas. The whispers from the river. She had to know the truth. And she would find out soon enough. The unmasking of Dr. Kofi. One evening, after assisting in another successful birth, Ton noticed Kofi slip away into the storeroom, holding the placenta. This time, she followed him. Keeping her footsteps light, she pressed against the wall, peering through the narrow gap of the storeroom door. Kofi moved quickly, as if driven by urgency and guilt. She watched as he carefully unwrapped the placenta and placed it inside a separate bundle, one that looked exactly like the others he gave to the mothers. Her breath caught. He wasn't disposing of them properly. He was swapping them. Before she could react, there was a knock at the back door. Kofi froze. Then, with trembling hands, he picked up the real placenta and stepped into the night. Ton followed, keeping to the shadows, her heart pounding. She trailed him out of the clinic, through the narrow pathways of the village, until he stopped at the edge of the forest. Waiting for him in the darkness was a figure draped in city clothes. Ton's blood ran cold. She didn't need to see his face to know. Malik. Her chest tightened as she watched the exchange. She saw Kofi hesitate, as if he was questioning everything. But then, with shaking fingers, he handed over the placenta. Malik grinned, dropping a heavy pouch of gold into Kofi's hands. Ton couldn't believe it. Dr. Kofi, the man she had admired, the man the village had worshipped, was a liar. A thief. She felt sick. She wanted to storm out and confront him right then and there. But she didn't. Because if Kofi had gone this far, how much deeper did the darkness go? She needed to know everything. She needed proof. She would bring him down. But not yet. She would wait. Watch. Gather the truth. And when the time was right, she would make him answer for his sins. The betrayal unfolds. The night was thick with silence, the kind that wrapped itself around Banchua like a hidden shadow. The villagers slept soundly, unaware of the darkness creeping through their peaceful home. But Town was awake. Her heart pounded as she moved through the narrow village paths, her bare feet silent against the earth. She had followed Kofi before. She had watched him. She had waited for proof. And tonight, she would finally catch him in the act. The truth in the darkness. Ton had always trusted Kofi. But now, all she saw was a liar. A thief. A betrayer of the mothers who had trusted him with their lives. She hid behind a mango tree, her body pressed against its rough bark. In the clearing ahead, Kofi stood face to face with Malik. The two men spoke in hushed voices, their tones urgent. Then, in the pale moonlight, Kofi handed over a bundle. The placenta. Town's stomach twisted. She had suspected it, but seeing it with her own eyes made her blood boil. She saw Malik weigh the bundle in his hands, then grin as he handed Kofi a pouch of gold. Town couldn't hold back any longer. She stepped out of the shadows, her voice like thunder. You betrayed us. Kofi and Malik whipped around, their faces frozen in shock. You stole from the mothers who trusted you, she spat, her voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. A desperate justification. Kofi took a step forward, hands raised. Turned, listen. No. You listen. Her voice cracked with emotion. I have watched you, Kofi. I have seen what you do. Every birth, every placenta, gone. Given to him. She pointed at Malik, eyes blazing. Why? Why would you do this? Kofi's chest tightened, his shame pressing down on him like a great weight. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. I had no choice. No choice. Tom's laugh was bitter. You always had a choice. You could have come to us. You could have asked the village for help. Kofi shook his head. Would you have let my mother die? His voice was raw. Would you have watched her slip away when the money was right in front of me? Tom's eyes filled with tears, but she did not waver. I understand wanting to save her, Kofi. But this? Stealing from mothers. Selling something sacred. This is not the man I knew. Kofi looked away, his shame too heavy to bear. A choice must be made. I am going to the village elders, Town said, her voice firm as stone. They must know the truth. Kofi panicked. He reached out, grabbing her hand. Please, Town, he begged. Give me time. Let me fix this before the village turns against me. Town snatched her arm away. You must face what you've done. Kofi knew there was no change in her mind. She would not stay silent. He had lost her trust forever. The monster he let in. Malik, who had been watching the exchange with amusement, finally spoke. Well, this is unfortunate. His voice was casual, but his eyes were cold. You should have been more careful, Kofi. Kofi turned to him, his body tense. You have what you wanted. We are done. Malik's laughter sent a chill through him. Oh, my friend, he said, stepping forward. You think you can just stop? Kofi's stomach sank. Malik's voice turned sharp. I have buyers, Kofi. They expect a supply. If you stop, they will ask questions. And if I suffer, you suffer. Kofi staggered back, realizing the trap he had walked into. The moment he had taken Malik's money, he had sold himself to the devil. Malik leaned in, voice soft, menacing. "You will keep giving me what I need, or you will regret it." Ton watched in horror as Kofi stayed silent. He had lost control. The darkness he had invited in would not leave so easily. The cry from the earth. Before Kofi could make a decision, a scream ripped through the night. A sound so full of agony and grief that it made the trees shudder. Turned, Kofi, and Malik whirled around, their argument forgotten. They ran toward the sound, toward the village square. A woman was collapsed on the ground, sobbing, her fingers clawing at the dirt beneath her. It was Esi, the young mother who had given birth weeks ago. Her body shook with grief, her eyes wild and unfocused. The villagers gathered, murmuring in confusion and fear. Kofi pushed forward. "Esi, what happened?" The woman lifted her tear-streaked face to him, her voice barely a whisper. "My baby." Kofi's heart clenched. "Your baby is fine, Esi. She's healthy." But Esi shook her head violently. "No. Not my baby." Her body convulsed with sobs. She pointed at the ground. "My placenta. I buried it here." Kofi's blood ran cold. Esi clawed at the dirt, digging frantically. "I heard it crying." The villagers gasped. Kofi could not breathe. The air was thick with something unseen. Esi's fingers dug deeper. And then she froze. Her eyes widened. And then she screamed. The villagers stumbled back, eyes wide with horror. Because beneath the dirt, where the placenta should have been, was nothing. Only an empty, crumpled bundle of cloth. A fake. The truth was no longer hidden. The night was alive with whispers. And then, from the river, a baby's wail carried through the wind. Kofi felt the weight of judgment settle upon him. He was trapped. There was no escape now. The truth had begun to rise. And the spirits were watching. The wrath of the spirits. The night was thick with fear. Whispers of Esi's discovery spread through the village of Bantua like wildfire. Mothers who had given birth at Kofi's clinic began to murmur amongst themselves, questioning their own buried bundles. The air felt heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on the land. And then, the river began to churn. The elders gather. By morning, the village chief, Elder Boko, had heard everything. He was a man of great wisdom, his face etched with the lines of a life spent leading his people. Now, he stood before the gathered villagers, his deep voice trembling with anger and worry. "There is unrest in Bantua," he declared. "The spirits whisper, and the river moves when there is no wind." The villagers nodded in fearful agreement. They had all felt it, the unease in the air, the unnatural weight of the silence. Something was coming. And it would not be merciful. The spirits rise. By midday, the Oro River had become wild and restless. The once clear waters had turned a deep, murky black, and waves crashed violently against the shore. And then, they appeared. Figures rising from the depths, their forms shifting like mist, their eyes hollow yet filled with sorrow. They were small, frail, but their presence shook the earth itself. The spirits of the unborn had awakened. A low, haunting whisper filled the air, calling through the trees, sending goosebumps across the skin of every man, woman, and child. Return what was taken. Restore what was lost. Elder Boko turned to the ancestral priestess, Mama Jora, seeking answers. She was old as time itself, her silver hair woven with beads, her eyes milky with sight beyond sight. She lifted her staff, her voice a tremor in the air. "The spirits have risen for justice." The villagers shuddered. They will not rest until balance is restored, she warned. And then, Malik arrived. Malik's final threat. The tension was thick as smoke when Malik strode into the village. Dressed in his fine city clothes, his eyes sharp and cruel, he looked out at the fearful villagers and smirked. He found Kofi standing in the crowd. His voice was calm, but full of poison. "You've started a mess, Kofi." The villagers turned to Kofi, confusion and suspicion brewing like a storm. Malik took a step forward, his presence heavy with unspoken threats. "The trade is not over," he hissed. "My buyers still want their share. If you refuse me, we both go down." Kofi staggered back, Malik's words cutting deeper than any blade. For the first time, the villagers noticed his trembling hands, his sunken eyes, the weight of his guilt. The truth was bubbling to the surface. And Kofi couldn't hold it in anymore. The confession. "No." Kofi's voice rang through the air, clear and resolute. Malik's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Kofi stepped forward, his heart hammering against his chest. "No more. I won't do this anymore." And then, he turned to his people. The people who had loved him. The people who had trusted him. The people he had betrayed. He took a deep breath. And he told them everything. Every lie. Every stolen placenta. Every sin. By the time he finished, there was silence. A deep, hollow silence, more deafening than any scream. Then came the voices of the betrayed. "How could you do this? We trusted you, Kofi. You stole from the mothers. From our children." Ton stood off to the side, her eyes full of sorrow but no surprise. She had already known the truth. The villagers backed away from Kofi, the weight of their disgust and heartbreak crushing him. He had once been their savior. Now, he was a curse upon the land. And the spirits of the unborn were still watching. Malik's fate. The whispers of the spirits grew louder, their voices now an unrelenting wail. The river boiled like an angry beast. The villagers turned their eyes to Malik. And for the first time, Malik looked afraid. The air was thick with judgment, and the spirits had chosen their target. The wind howled through the trees as ghostly hands rose from the water, stretching toward him. Malik took a step back. Then another. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face pale with terror. No, this isn't my fault," he stammered. But the spirits knew the truth. The river surged forward, faster than any human could run. Malik screamed as the hands latched onto his body, pulling him backward, dragging him toward the churning water. "Kofi! Help me!" Kofi did not move. No one did. With a final piercing scream, Malik was dragged beneath the waves. The water calmed instantly, as if nothing had happened. The only trace of him left was the wind carrying the last echoes of his screams into the night. The judgment of the spirits. The spirits hovered above the water, their empty eyes still locked on Kofi. He stared at them, awaiting his own punishment. Mama Jora stepped forward, her ancient voice like the rustling of leaves in the wind. "The spirits have been heard. Balance begins, but justice is not yet complete." The villagers turned to Kofi, waiting. Elder Boko's voice was stern and sorrowful. "Dr. Kofi Adibeo, for your crimes against the mothers and the children of Banchua, you must answer to the spirits." Kofi closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He had brought this upon himself. And now, his punishment awaited. Redemption or punishment. Dr. Kofi Adibeo knelt in the center of the village square, his head bowed, his hands trembling. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the gathered villagers, people who had once adored him, who had once called him a blessing from the gods. Now, they looked upon him with disgust, sorrow, and anger. The air was thick with judgment. Elder Boko stood at the front, his expression etched with disappointment. Beside him, the other village elders whispered amongst themselves, deciding Kofi's fate. Some spoke of banishment, of sending him away forever, a man unworthy of forgiveness. Others hesitated, remembering the years of good he had done. The weight of their words pressed down on Kofi's shoulders. He had betrayed them. And now, he would face the consequences. The plea for mercy. A soft voice broke the silence. "Please, let me speak." The crowd parted, revealing Nanaya, Kofi's mother. She had grown strong again, her once frail body now filled with new life, thanks to the very money that had damned her son. She stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears, but her voice steady. "My son has sinned. He has broken the trust of this village. He has committed terrible wrongs." Kofi flinched at her words, but he did not look up. He deserved them. But then, Nanaya lifted her chin. "But has he not also saved countless lives? Has he not delivered our children into this world, healed our sick, and given when he had nothing to give?" The villagers murmured, shifting uncomfortably. "Even good men can fall," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "But true redemption is not found in punishment. It is found in making amends." She turned to Mama Jora, the priestess, the only one who could interpret the will of the spirits. "Tell us, wise mother," Nanaya pleaded. "What must he do to right this wrong?" The villagers held their breath, waiting. Mama Jora closed her eyes, lifting her staff toward the heavens. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint whispers of the spirits. And then, she spoke. The spirit's judgment. The balance must be restored. Mama Jara's voice was low, filled with ancient power. Dr. Kofi cannot erase what he has done, but he can atone for it. The crowd leaned in, hanging on her words. He must journey into the sacred mountains, where the spirits reside. There, he will perform the rituals of atonement and cleanse himself of the stain upon his soul. A hush fell over the crowd. The sacred mountains. No one traveled there without reason. It was a place of penance and trial, where those seeking forgiveness went to plead before the spirits. Until he is forgiven, he will not return to Banchua. Mama Jora turned to Kofi, her piercing gaze locking onto his bowed head. "And you must never practice medicine again, until the spirits allow it." A heavy silence followed. The words struck Kofi like a blade to the heart. To never practice medicine again. To walk away from the only thing that had ever given his life meaning. It was a punishment far worse than exile. But he did not argue. He had lost the right to argue. Instead, he slowly lifted his head, his eyes glistening with tears. And he accepted his fate. "I will go." The villagers watched him in silence, their expressions unreadable. Some were satisfied, others still filled with anger. But the decision had been made. Dr. Kofi Adibeo would walk the path of redemption. The journey of atonement. At dawn, Kofi left Banchua. He carried only a simple satchel, a flask of water, and the weight of his past sins. Ton watched from a distance, her heart conflicted. She had once admired him. She had once called him a brother. Now, she did not know what to feel. But as Kofi disappeared into the horizon, she whispered, "Find your way back, Kofi." And then he was gone. The wandering healer. Years passed. The people of Banchua moved on, but the memory of Dr. Kofi Adibeo lingered. The Oro River returned to its calm state, and the spirits no longer whispered in the night. But sometimes, travelers came with strange stories. Stories of a man, a wandering healer, who traveled from village to village. A man who healed the sick but refused payment. A man who never stayed in one place for too long, always moving, always searching for something. His name was never spoken, but the stories grew. Some said he was a ghost, seeking forgiveness from the spirits. Others said he was a man who had fallen but had fought his way back. But one thing was certain, wherever he went, people were saved. And so, the legend of the wandering healer spread. The spirit's final words. One evening, as Nana Ya stood by the riverbank, watching the water reflect the setting sun, she heard it. A voice, soft as the wind, yet as powerful as the tide. A voice that did not belong to the living. It whispered through the reeds, calling into the night air. He has learned. He will never forget. Tears welled in her aged eyes, but this time, they were tears of peace. Her son had lost his way, but he had found his purpose once more. He would never return to Banchua the same man. But maybe, just maybe, one day, he would return. And when he did, he would truly be healed. The end.